a chuckle and a twinkle in her eye. From me laddie to the basement, no nook or cranny goes unseen. With a hat of mismatched feathers, she's the prepper with a lip and a grin. Oh, the wonky prepper goes where others dare not venture. With a sense of humor and a bit of prep, she's the hero in this quirky venture.
Good morning and welcome to episode 2 of the Wonky Prepper podcast. Today we are going to be discussing what is in the news. The UN asks serious questions of ministers after activists highlight discriminatory mental health bill. Now this is based on a news story that I found by John Pring that was released on the 31st of July 2025 by the Disability News Service. And in our glossary, educate yourself in it, our weekly glossary, this week we are going to look at ambulatory wheelchair users, the who, what, when, where and how, why and all of that kind of stuff. And then we're going to talk about it and we're going to have a look at Mike Tango Whiskey's new video on YouTube. We're not going to talk too much about his video, but we're going to talk about what exactly is TOTC or TOTC and why we should be looking at using that as a phrase more than SHTF. So in the news today, that's what we're going to look at first off. But before we get started, can I just say, just doing the research this week has been incredibly difficult, and this happened due to the new Online Safety Act and data protection laws in Europe and the UK. How do I know this? Well, when I went back to the news article I'm about to get into, I put in the headline as a search because I was a little bit too lazy this morning to actually use the link I've saved for myself because, you know, that requires going and looking for it, blah, blah, blah. As I quite normally do that. And I ended up with a random page of no results except the regulation of fresh water and access to water in India. I'm not even kidding. So I got a bit worried. I thought the article had been taken down completely. I did use the link I have and was able to get back to the news article, but if you don't have the link, the chances of being able to find said article is very limited, and that is not what this Online Safety Act was supposed to do, or was it? Anyway, we aren't going to do the deep dive on that right now, maybe another time, but what we are got here to look at in this article by John Pring on the 31st of July 2025, which I found in the Disability News Service website, about the UN asking serious questions after activists highlight discriminatory mental health bill. Now, I have copied and pasted into the transcript all of the article. I may not go through the whole thing, just a few bits, but depends how my voice holds out for the next foreseeable few minutes, shall we say. It's been a day already. Okay, so let's have a look at the bones of the article. Links to the articles themselves can be found in the transcript, which will be available through our Stand store on the 20th of August. Okay. A UN committee has raised serious concerns that the UK government's mental health bill is breaching the International Disability Rights Convention, with the legislation set to complete its passage through Parliament when MPs return from their summer holidays. It's so nice to be able to take a summer holiday, isn't it? Most people can't afford them, let alone feed their kids during the summer holidays. But, you know, they're off swanning around, getting their lots of money. But, you know, who are we to complain, right? The bill is based on draft legislation drawn up by the last Conservative government and has passed almost unnoticed through the Lords and the Commons. despite significant concerns raised by disabled campaigners. They believe it falls far short of the fundamental reforms needed to ensure full human rights for disabled people, and that it will not stop them being subjugated to forcible detention and degrading treatment. There have also been protests by autistic people and people with learning difficulties who believe the bill will not do enough to keep them out of mental health hospitals or protect them from badly run hospital services that have led to cruelty, abuse and even death. And we are going to have a look at that in a little bit, because for me that's very personal. We'll just let these ambulances go past for a second. I'll be right back. Now, the UN's Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disability has written to the UK government through the UN's Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to express its concerns with that the bill will breach the UN Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, UNCRPD, if it becomes law in its present form. It said it had received credible information that indicated such concerns. The committee fears the bill will continue to allow disabled people to be detained in hospital on the basis of their mental health impairment and the provision of mental health services that are not based on free and informed consent. It also questions whether disabled people and disabled people's organisations have been closely consulted and actively involved in drafting the bill, which I can absolutely guarantee you they have not. And it doesn't matter what side of the building you're on. That's just the way that they are behaving at the moment. It points out that it called as far back as August 2017 for the UK to change laws that allow non-consensual, involuntary, compulsory treatment and detention of disabled people based on their actual or perceived impairment, while making a similar call last year. The action by the committee follows concerns raised by the user-led rights-based organisation Liberation, which is run by people with mental health diagnosis. Dorothy Gould, Liberation's founder, said she had contacted the committee because she felt no one within the UK appeared willing to take notice of the concerns about the bill that had been raised by disabled people with lived experience of the areas it covers, while the government have been utterly unwilling to listen. Which, let's be honest, is not surprising at all. She said Liberation's repeated calls for full human rights for people experiencing acute mental distress or trauma, and autistic people and those with learning difficulties have been ignored, dismissed and misrepresented. In contrast, with promising examples of genuine progress in other countries such as Mexico, the UK government appears stuck in the past, she said. Yeah, they're not wrong. They're not wrong. There's a lot of things the NHS and the UK government's health and all of that kind of stuff is way stuck in the past. Gould said that the bill rests on the outdated assumption that some people with mental health diagnosis will always need to be detained against their will in psychiatric hospitals and treated under compulsion to protect them, mental health professionals and the public in general against serious risk. She pointed to a World Health Organization and UN publication, see pages 15-16, box 2. Okay, I don't know what that's about, but you know, if you go to the actual thing, I'm sure the actual article, I'm sure you will be able to figure that out. Or that is the pages of the UN publication that concluded that was inadequate research evidence that these forms of coercion prevent risk, while they were actively discriminatory and had resulted in serious harm, while there was also alternative and better ways of handling any risks. She said, given this, the government's argument that it can only give people with mental health diagnoses more rights, not the full human rights held by people, members of the public in general, falls on very weak ground. It would be difficult, in fact, to describe the government's approach as more than the continuing discrimination against people with mental health diagnosis that has dominated UK politics generation in, generation out. This discrimination must end once and for all. And yes, it should! God's sake! What we need instead of legislation which breaks away decisively from the current health-dominated model, recognises us as a whole people and ensures that we can live independently in the community in the same way that everybody else does. Liberation will now be submitting further evidence before the UN committee challenges the UK government over the bill in Geneva next month. Simone Aspis, Free Our People Now campaign manager for Inclusion London, welcomed the committee's investigation. She said FOPN was very disappointed that the government had introduced a bill that fails to implement the committee's recommendations to stop compulsory treatment within hospital settings, stop forced medical treatment, and set out plans to reduce and end institutionalism. Aspis says this bill starts from the wrong place, locking autistic people and people with learning difficulties up in inhumane institutions which deprives them of our liberty. FOPN will be submitting its own evidence to the UN committee in which it will explain how the bill itself and the government, parliament and the Department of Health and Social Care have all violated our human rights. She said the knowledge that was a Labour government that first ratified UNCRPD in 2009 makes it worse, with its actions showing it has now total contempt for implementation of the treaty. The UN committee is seeking answers from the UK government by 11th of August and will then examine its concerns during its next session in Geneva from the 11th to the 29th of August. It's already set to investigate concerns that the Labour government's Universal Credit Bill is a fresh attack on disabled people's rights. The Department of Health and Social Care said yesterday, Wednesday, that it would respond to the committee in due course and has confidence that the bill was compatible with UNCRPD. The Mental Health Bill will reform the Mental Health Act of 1983, and it includes measures to stop the use of police and prison cells as places of safety for people in mental health crisis, stop the inappropriate detention of autistic people and people with learning difficulties, and introduced a statutory care and treatment plans. The bill also gives patients more say over how they should be treated if they are sectioned under the Act, and offers stronger protections for patients, staff and the public, the government says. It also offers patients the right to choose a person to represent their interests and greater access to advocacy when they are detained, and it reforms the use of community treatment orders so they are only used when appropriate and proportionate. That's what they say. No, I haven't actually had a look at the bill itself. I'm going off this article, okay? But there is a lot to unpack here. But what is very worrying is, as an autistic person who has friends who are parents of autistic children and who themselves are autistic, the absolute lack of proper training across the board is utterly disturbing. And I'm not going to lie about that. It's disturbing. I, for one, will refuse to go to the hospital for any kind of help now unless there is literally no other choice and my life is in danger. Okay? That's my basic rule of thumb at this point. Unless my life is in danger and my choice is taken away and it's down to Tanny, then I am not going. I'm not going, and I don't care how much pain I'm in. And that is because of the way that I've been treated, not just here, but mostly here, where I live, in York, but everywhere else as well. Even if that is the case, that I have a living will, and that insists that I must either have my partner, sister or my son present at all times 24/7 while I'm in the hospital, because I need to have an advocate. And this is because I no longer have faith or trust in any of the staff in the hospitals in my area. Obviously there are staff that are great, don't get me wrong, and they are wonderful, and they are fighting an uphill battle when it comes to what is going on right now. But when you have witnessed with your own two eyes not only the treatment of yourself but of another woman, an autistic woman who had gone through a traumatic late stage miscarriage, right, who was in full meltdown and being dragged through the gynae unit in York Hospital by 2 security guards, kicking and screaming in full meltdown, and she was in fear for her life as well as going through that grief. They locked her in a room by herself because staff didn't want to deal with her because, and I will quote the nurse who came in, she has issues and is having a bad day. The woman was autistic and they didn't want to deal with her during meltdown. Now, I don't know about you, but if you've just lost a child, that's bad enough for anyone. But for a neurodivergent person, it is worse, because your emotions aren't regulated. We can't regulate our emotions. And so we go into either a state of complete shutdown or a catatonic state, and I have been there myself for the same reason. Or we have a meltdown. Now, meltdowns can be physical as well as quite verbal or loud or just emotionally a cloud that you can't get out of. And yes, it can be scary. I know no one should ever put themselves in danger, but on the flip side of that, fully trained staff should be able to calm the meltdown and that person somewhat like a human being and talk to the person, help them through it, but not making it worse by them being manhandled by strangers, especially large, intimidating male strangers, and dragging them, literally dragging them and locking them up like a rabid animal. I mean, what's next? We get put down? Because that's what it feels like. And that's what happened to the autistic woman in the US, who very bravely a few years ago showed people what a meltdown looked like for her and how her dog helped her through it. And yet 5 very brave, and I use that term so loosely and with as much sarcasm as possible, decided on a day she was crossing the road to end her life. It is my absolute regret I do not remember her name, and I wish I did, and nor can I find her story due to the new Online Safety Act. If you can find her story and her name, please do shoot me an email. I would appreciate it. Hers is a name that deserves to be remembered. On this particular day in the hospital, though, I am aware that the site came down and took her away. But as any neurodivergent person knows, they aren't trained either for the most part and have no idea how to deal with a neurodivergent person. And down to the law, they can and will lock you up and keep you there for as long as they want to and force you into whatever treatment they see fit. And the problem is that the medical establishment in this country do not recognize that autistic people or neurodivergent people do not have the same central nervous system as everybody else, or the same neurological system as everybody else, so we react differently to medications and may not act the way they want us to. During the lockdown, we saw people with learning disabilities being refused treatment are left on their own to expire because difficult decisions had to be made. It seems to me that those with disabilities, and particularly mental health issues, are used as a scapegoat for everything, and with less rights than my cat had when it was time to have her put down. Not even kidding. With both sides of Parliament utterly unwilling to listen, these issues are some of the most insidious we are facing as a community. The thing is, as things go, this Mental Health Act is not only a hit on people with mental illness alone, but all people with disabilities. Because I can tell you now that whether it is PTSD, anxiety, depression, or a traumatic brain injury caused by how we became disabled, most with physical disabilities have some kind of mental illness. It just comes with the territory. You know, if you have been disabled from birth, you're going to have experienced a certain type of bullying, a certain type of other people's behaviour, a certain type of whatever. People with ADHD have been told 20,000 times more than anybody else they are too much. They need to calm down. You know, that's only one type of people. And then you're having to deal with maybe you've been in an accident, lost a leg or an arm. You know, you're having to deal with the anxiety of ever getting back in a car, the PTSD from the actual event itself, the depression from not being the same person as you were before. This is all stuff that comes alongside being physically disabled, as well as those who are mentally ill. So to say that disabled people have less rights than able-bodied people, that is what the bill is saying, is that all disabled people, not just mentally ill people, but all disabled people have less rights than able-bodied people. Prisoners have more rights than disabled people and mentally ill people. So we are not allowed to have full human rights. But we are allowed more rights. Oh gee, thanks Dad. In fact, as much as people say that disabled people may be treated like second-class citizens, I would like to say that less than that, we come last. We're probably 10th out of 10 levels of humanity at this point, which means we are below major criminals like serial killers and worse. They have the right to representation. And according to this bill, we really don't. And it's not okay. The amount of times that my partner has been told that he can't come in with me is ridiculous. And then I can't advocate for myself because they won't allow it. They will bully me and gaslight me and abuse me to where I have to just sit down and shut up and put up with it. And it's not okay. Whereas if he was in there, he'd be causing all kinds of hell. The discrimination must end. Until humans are treated equally, none of this will end. So, first off, it's been the elderly, the poor, the working class, and disabled, now mental health. Who's next? Artists? Actors? Independent journalists? Content creators? Oh, wait. So welcome to Educate Yourself in It. This is our glossary of terms to do with disabled people and to help educate and or teach awareness. So you don't have to be an ignorant twonk any longer. Okay, so today we are looking at ambulatory wheelchair users. Who, what, when, where, how, why, and stuff. So did you know out of the 1.2 million wheelchair users in the UK, approximately 1/3 of them are ambulatory users, myself included. What this means is that they do fall under that umbrella of being disabled but do not need to use a wheelchair and are capable of walking in some circumstances. So what is an ambulatory wheelchair user? An ambulatory wheelchair user is someone who can walk but who also uses a wheelchair some or most of the time. They may use a wheelchair to manage pain, fatigue, or balance issues, or to conserve energy for longer distances or activities. Essentially, it's a person who can walk but chooses to use a wheelchair for increased mobility and independence. Now, they're not always in a wheelchair. Ambulatory wheelchair users are not permanently confined to a wheelchair. They may walk with aids such as canes or crutches or walker frame thingies like I do, or they may walk unassisted for short distances. I tend to not to use mobility equipment in the house. I tend to walk around my house and use the furniture or the walls to fall on if I need to. So, or to steady myself. Now, ambulatory wheelchair users will have varying needs. They relying on their wheelchair can vary greatly from day to day and even from hour to hour, depending on our condition and the activity that they are undertaking. Accessibility. The decision to use a wheelchair can also be influenced by the accessibility of the environment. For example, a user may choose to use a wheelchair in a crowded space or where stairs are involved. Yeah. They might do, or they might use the lift, but who knows, right? Choice and control. Ambulatory wheelchair users often have the choice of when to use a wheelchair, which can be empowering. This contrasts with individuals who require a wheelchair for all mobility. Understanding and acceptance. It is important to understand that ambulatory wheelchair users are disabled, even if they can walk sometimes. They may face misconceptions and insensitive comments from others who don't understand their situation. Examples of use. Someone with multiple sclerosis might use a wheelchair on days when their symptoms are more severe, or someone with chronic pain may use a wheelchair for longer outings to conserve energy. Unfortunately, this can all be very hard to convey to the general public, many of whom, when they see an ambulatory user standing up or walking a few steps, think this means they are actually fine and don't need a wheelchair at all and are using it to get sympathy or better parking, which of course is ridiculous. Yes, there are people who abuse the system. There always is. But the amount of people who genuinely need mobility aids far outweigh the ones who don't. For the ambulatory user, just as for all users, their mobility aid can serve as a lifeline, allowing them to have some extra independence and be able to actually leave the house and socialise without causing extreme fatigue or pain, which makes the abuse and discrimination they suffer even more unfair. Many users report being told things like, well, you don't look sick. You're too young to need a wheelchair. You're taking away from someone who really needs it. Can I have a go? You've had loads of time and you can walk anyway. Stop being so lazy. This kind of judgment and ignorance is not only rude but can be extremely hurtful to someone who is simply trying to go about their business and live their life however they can. Now, this snippet of article I found on the This Is Me website from thisismeagency.co.uk, and it's about ambulatory wheelchair users. So how can we educate ourselves? Switch your perception and look at it from another point of view. If you think about it, we as able-bodied people don't stand on our feet for 24 hours a day, every day. We need to sit down or lie down and rest our legs and bodies. If we try to do too much without proper rest, we can cause injuries to ourselves and make ourselves more vulnerable to illness. It's exactly the same for ambulatory wheelchair users, except they run out of steam long before we do. While we may be able to walk or stand up for several hours before needing to sit down, for the ambulatory user it could only be 1 hour or even 10 minutes before they reach that point. Don't judge or make assumptions. You don't know what somebody else is going through that day, or what kind of health issues they may have that you can't see, and really, it's none of your business. Just because someone is using a wheelchair doesn't mean you can't ask them why. They are under no obligation to discuss it with you or give any explanation at all. Do some research. It only takes a few minutes to go to a search engine and find out the many reasons people may use a wheelchair, even if they're able to walk. There's no excuse for ignorance when we have so many opportunities to learn. Take the time, because you might be surprised at what you find out, and your efforts to understand will definitely be appreciated. Living with a disability in an able-bodied world isn't always the easiest thing to do. So whatever the reason, if using a wheelchair means an ambulatory user can go out and work or socialise without feeling completely fatiguing themselves, then who are we to judge? So let's talk about it. This week I was made aware of a really great channel on YouTube, Mike Whiskey Tango, and one video in particular which I think just sums up mine and, as he says, 68% of preppers' attitudes towards prepping. And I for one would just like to say TOTC or TOTC or Turd on the Floor is a way better acronym than Shit Hit the Fan for the realistic amongst us. And can we please normalise this? Can we please just normalise this? It's brilliant. The worst situation many of us in the UK will ever experience is flooding. Maybe the occasional riot, landslide and inconveniences caused by life in general, car accidents or breakdowns, work accidents or redundancy, the death of a partner, close family member, the boiler breaking needing replacing, a pipe bursting either in your house or in the road of the main supply, electric transformers catching fire, hacking issues on your accounts or your banks or companies you purchase your basic necessities from. These are honestly the worst that life will throw at you. These are the turds on the floor. They are 68% of the things that could go wrong, and most commonly will. Prepping is about being ready for those things to happen just in case, so that you and your family are not inconvenienced much if and when they do. It could be as simple as having a better kit in your car in case of breakdown or slow moving traffic. One that is either too big for a thief to worry about, or convenient enough to remove from the car during work hours or at night time, so it isn't a temptation to those who might see it. It's that simple. It could be having enough food in your home to cover you and your family for a good 2 weeks to 3 months. It may even look like having generators or a portable solar setup for medical equipment in case of blackouts, short term or otherwise, depending on your needs. Extra medical supplies or medications in case of temporary supply shortages, or alternatives for longer term challenges. It's not about having gas masks and hazmat suits, although I have no idea what your kinks are, and that is not for me to judge. The point being, a lot of the major stuff that a lot of the stuff the major prepper channels get into is a lot of fear-based ridiculous nonsense that most of us will never have to deal with in our lifetime, and our kids, when we pass, will have to deal with it to clear our homes. Pretty sure my kids in particular are more worried about the vinyl and DVD collection and what I have on the supermarket shelves than how much camo gear I have and how many MREs I have. And yes, I'm being very tongue-in-cheek about this, and with good reason. The majority of what now has been coined as prepping is basically what most of our grandparents and great-grandparents called life. It was a way of life based around preserving in-season food that they grew themselves to make sure they had food all year round and to make the most of what they had so they could feed themselves and their families when things got tough or out of season. They had extra blankets for winter and winter clothing that was put away in mothballs for the summer, and summer household items like lighter curtains, bedding and clothing that was put away in winter in much the same fashion. How do we know this? Well, we've still got the books. We still have a few people with the first-hand experience. And most of all, we have the physical evidence as found in chests in people's attics, sheds, cellars and abandoned homes. Items that, depending on who you are either seen as junk or treasure, but tell a lot about the story and ways people used to live. Sheds full of spare parts and tools where the man of the house, in inverted commas, if there was one, would tinker. And most of the time would fix things or mend things to make the house more user-friendly and to make life easier. We relied on ourselves and our skills and abilities more than we relied on others to do things for us. Unless it was a new thing or a way beyond our abilities thing. For the most part, people made do and did what they could to repair and create what they needed from what they already had or what was available to them. Before people come at me with, but we don't have as much time, can I just say that during World War II, men, for the most part, had gone to war. The men who were left, depending on their abilities and training and expertise, were either taken to work for the MOD here, or rarely, and I mean very rarely, left to do their day job and expected to be a part of the Home Guard or to be a warden on top of their day job. Women did the full-time jobs, day jobs of men, because there were no men to do them, so the women had to do them. They grew food, kept chickens, had to make sure they had blackout furnishings in their home because you could be fined. You could even be jailed if you didn't have proper blackout. That's how bad it was. Like, not even kidding. So they had to make sure that was there. They had to volunteer within, had to volunteer, okay? They had to volunteer within the community to help with community projects, such as making blankets, children clothes, or putting together packages from home for soldiers, working with the WI, the Women's Institute, who halfway through the war decided to start collecting seasonal fruit, nuts and other plant-based foraging to help support locals in rationing by preserving it and passing it round to the local community and beyond. So once the local community had what they wanted from what they could gather, they passed it to the next town and kept doing that for the rest of the war. And they did this on top of running the home, cooking on rations and keeping the home fires burning. Literally. And yes, they did have time to themselves, so don't go there. But we don't. But it's different now. No, it's not. It isn't different. We are different. We have become accustomed to convenience and TV and online entertainment and distraction to the point we have no time left in our days. People then were fatigued, exhausted, permanently, not just from the day's work, but also from war. The permanent state of never knowing what is coming. You know, you could have a great day, and then at 2 o'clock in the morning, the sirens go off, and you could lose your house. But you'd have to get everybody into the bomb shelter at the bottom of the garden, which, by the way, you had to build yourself. Just saying. If you had a garden. Or you had to get to the local one before the bombing started. But you also wouldn't know, you know, you'd have to stay safe. Panicking every time a man in uniform came to the door in case it was to tell you your loved one was gone or missing. They did it because it was life. It has always been life, and we made do. Some of us still live this way. And mostly these days it's smallholders and the rare people in urban environments like me who dream of having a small holding. As disabled people, it is harder, let's be honest. And I'm one who does tend to whack the TV on and get whatever done using it as a radio or music option. However, I tend to get distracted by the pretty colours and movements. If you've got a movie on or a TV series and you know the movie in the series, you go, oh, this is coming up, and you go and watch it. So what are you doing? The job's forgotten. However, recently, I have found myself turning off the TV, or rather not having it on, and actually putting on music or the actual radio. You know, because we've got an all singing, all dancing stereo hi-fi system that plays everything from MP3s to vinyl, and I just find myself being more productive. And yeah, I mean, like, I got it for Tanny for his birthday, for Christmas. I got him for Christmas a year and a half, 2 Christmases ago. Not last Christmas, Christmas before. I got it for Tanny. So sure, the sounds are there. And they keep me going, but not so much the visual. The visual stimulation isn't there, okay? And I sat there the other day and I wondered just when I stopped doing this. When the kids were younger, I'd whack on the radio or a CD and do the housework, getting it all done as fast as I possibly could, because I was doing it to the music, and I'd go, right, I've got 3 minutes and 25 seconds until the end of this song. So what can I do in that? And I would make it into a game because my ADHD brain loves a good game, right? So that's what I would do. And the TV wasn't really an option until the work of the day had been done. The occasional soap when I was having lunch, but most of the time I used to sit outside and have lunch outside. Or cartoons during a Saturday morning, or during afternoon tea when the kids got home from school, but rarely any other time. It was only on, very rarely. Most of the time, I used to have something in my hands when I did watch TV. Get your minds out the gutter. Oh my God. Brian, stop it. I mean, like a notebook to organise myself, or some sewing or crochet or mending or something, anything. But my hands used to be busy. But never nothing. And all of a sudden, that's literally gone away. I know as a disabled person, I know as disabled people, we have to modify some of our behaviours. And I'm a big supporter of one job a day, which, if you follow Blue Self-Reliance on any socials, you will see I am currently taking part in the Every Bit Counts challenge, run by Jessica at Three Rivers Homestead. It encourages us to do 1 bit of food preservation a day for the whole month of August. This week alone, I have managed to put away 9 jars of pickled eggs, 3 jars of caramelised onions, 4 jars of bread and butter pickled courgettes, 1 jar of mixed spice, 1 jar of dried red jalapenos, 1 jar of rosemary and garlic salt, 2 jars of leftover chili. Every little bit adds up, and I'm using items I already have in my stores, freezer and fridge that need using up, so I can rotate stock and make room for the coming holiday season. All that from just doing one thing a day. Nothing more. Not overtaxing myself. Just doing one thing. And most of those things took me less than 10 minutes. Not even kidding. Even the water bathing stuff. Took me 2 minutes to set it up. And then I'll walk away for 2 or 3 hours. Maybe check it in an hour. Make sure that the water hasn't gone too low. Top it up. Walk away again. Come back later. It's not hard. And it doesn't take as long as you think it does. Break the jobs down. Imagine what we could achieve doing just one thing a day for a year. That's 365 things. Not just food preservation, but making things, mending things, using our hands, growing things, planting seeds, learning a new skill. The point is, just because we are disabled doesn't mean we can't make sure we are able to take care of our families and ourselves. Yes, some people are more disabled than others, and I get that. I do get that. And I do realise that some people need 24/7 care, and I get that as well. I'm talking about the ambulatory users like me. Or partially ambulatory. People who can do some stuff for themselves. The way I see it, there is a woman who's got she was born with no arms, no legs. And she's got 6 kids. And she's done it all herself. She changes the nappies. She does everything herself. What the hell? And if she can do it, I think I can do something with my arms, even on the days my legs ain't working. Do you know what I mean? The point is, just because we're disabled doesn't mean we can't make sure we are able to take care of ourselves and our families by not really doing much more than we're already doing. If nothing else, being able to slowly regrow our sense of purpose and pride in our abilities, regaining our sense of self-worth and usefulness, let alone being able to add to the stores in your home in general, to be able to get yourself and your loved ones through those turd on the carpet moments in life, TOTC, let's normalise it. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of The Wonky Prepper. If there are topics you would like me to discuss or articles relating to disabled people in the wider world in general, or disability terms that you would like to see added to our glossary, then please do leave a comment or email me at admin@thebluepixie.com. That's BLOO pixie.com. But please no advertising or I'll have to block and report you for being a scammer. Don't forget, if you want the transcript to this or any other of our podcast episodes, they will be available on our Blues Self-Reliance Stand store as of the 20th of August 2025, along with any other downloadable content we have available. All links to today's content will be available in the transcripts. And remember, Wonkies, hold your head up, stay ready, stay you, and don't let the Moids win. See you next week.